Hi everyone, my name is Ava Mathews, and my project is Policing Respectability, Tattoos as Markers of Workplace Inequality. So my research question that I wanted to focus on is, how do customer-facing service job appearance policies reflect cultural ideas about professionalism and respectability? Obviously, there are many different stigmas that have arisen over the course of history due to many different things. However, tattoos have always been a prominent one, especially in the workplace and especially in those professional settings. A lot of people believe that tattoos aren't professional looking, or they might think that people aren't as intelligent or capable as other people without those physical markers. So I definitely wanted to research these different reasons why, and I also wanted to see what is considered professional, a professional environment, and what is considered non-professional, because as a society we don't really have a definition for that. So it was kind of interesting to see all of the different reasons of tattoo stigma, and then how some places are seen as professional compared to other places. So some reasons for tattoo stigma include no legal protections, outside perspectives, religious beliefs, and societal standards. So these are just a couple. There are obviously many more, but these are the ones that I mainly researched. And a big thing about this whole stigma is that tattoo discrimination is not merely bias, but is a part of power and the social construct that is found within professional workplaces. So like I said before, for part of my research question, I wanted to see why some places are seen as professional compared to other places. But one place that I really wanted to focus on was coffee shops, because I personally work at a coffee shop back in my hometown, and almost everybody, if not everybody, has tattoos, dyed hair, piercings of some kind. And so it's just interesting to see why those are allowed in that setting compared to a professional setting. So I wanted to see why coffee shops specifically weren't seen as professional, but obviously this can correlate to other unprofessional jobs that people view. So when I did my research, I found that professional workplaces, they're not just defined by how a group of people acts, but is more defined as the way society and different institutions enforce the expectations of professionalism. So these workspaces are adapting their physical arrangements and environments to support people who come in and work on their own things. So this qualitative study, it investigates how spaces like coffee shops that are used majority of the time for social gatherings, which are referred to as third-party places, they're being reshaped by customers that now use those spaces not only as social spaces, but as a workplace. So these people that come in and use this space as more of a workplace, they are known as customer workers. So those are people who primarily bring laptops and use the space to work when they come in, students who want to study, or people that work from home and just want to get out of the house. Those kind of people are known as customer workers. So they are known to be an essential part of the environment, where they have their own motivations and their own practices and everything of that sort. So a lot of it is based on these customers. They're arranging their physical aspects, their environment, to cater to these customers, because they are the primary factor in this whole setting even working as a whole. So it's just interesting to see how these places really don't focus on the employees themselves, because in a lot of professional places you'll see a lot of employees have to dress nice, they have to act all professional, and they have to do all these things, and they're held to very high standards. But in these not as professional workplaces, it's definitely different, because the customers are being focused on the most. So third-party places such as coffee shops, which are those who adapt their physical arrangements and environments to support the people who come in and work, they're beginning to blur the lines between informal spaces and professional spaces. So it's kind of just hard for some people to grasp on to the word professional and what professional means in a work setting, and it's just really interesting to see how professionalism is on a wide scale in society. So all of these third-party places, they're definitely beginning to blur those lines, and so coffee shops just aren't seen as professional because those lines are getting blurred more and more every day. So what does all this really mean for appearance policies in unprofessional workplace settings? Well, I came to the conclusions that productive third-party places, like coffee shops, they have a more relaxed, laid-back atmosphere. They specifically cater to the customers, meaning they focus less on themselves as employees. So they don't have as strict of rules regarding physical appearance, since they are not the sole focus of the workplace environment. So since they're not the sole focus, they really can do whatever they want. They can have tattoos, they can have piercings, they can have dyed hair, because in these unprofessional settings that we're seeing, there's really only one interaction, and then people go on with their day and they do their own thing and they have their own motivations and their own practices. In professional settings, there are usually meetings with people. You have to, again, have yourself held to a higher standard and be professional all the time because of these very important meetings with these very important people. But with unprofessional workplace settings, there's one interaction, maybe a couple interactions, and then people go on about their day. It's not a professional meeting. It doesn't matter as much. They're really just trying to make people's day. So you could tell that with these third-party places, since they're catering to the customers themselves, it's definitely more relaxed, laid back. Like, all of us I know have gone to coffee shops just to study or just to relax or have a little coffee date with a friend or something. Like, these are seen as places that are not supposed to be stressful or have any consequences with them. You don't really have yourself held to a higher standard as an employee there because there's no tension and there's no stress. And obviously there is going to be stress, but not in the same way as professional workplace settings. So for me personally, I have just recently gotten 2 tattoos, which is the biggest reason why I wanted to research this topic. One before coming to college and then one while in college. So this made me wonder if the discrimination was worldwide, or if it had to do with different religions and demographics or societal standards or whatever it was. I was very interested in seeing the reasons why tattoo stigma was a thing, because I was very uneducated on the topic. Obviously, I just thought people had their reasons, but it obviously goes a lot deeper than that. So as you can see with the middle picture, that is the one that I got before coming to college, and I thought that one was going to be an easy one to cover up because I have always been under the impression, because of society, and especially because of like my mom and dad saying, oh, you need to be able to cover up your tattoos, because they grew up in a world where tattoos weren't really allowed at all in professional places. So I was under the impression that I needed to place my tattoos in a place that would be easy to cover them up for work purposes and to be able to get a job after getting my degree, a professional job. So I thought that would be a good place for it, and I actually got a matching one with my mom, so she has it in the exact same spot. And for her, she does work in a professional setting. However, they don't mind as much. So that goes to show that there are some professional workplaces that do care, but there also are some who really don't care as much. So it's obviously not an all or nothing. It's very much in the middle, maybe not even in the middle. There might be one side that's more favored. I'm not sure. But we can see that I thought this was going to be easy to cover up. And in fact, it is one of my harder ones. The other one is on the underside of my bicep. And so when my arm is close to my side, you obviously can't see it that much. And when I'm wearing long sleeves, you definitely can't see it. Now, I can wear long sleeves to cover this forearm one up that I have in this picture. However, sleeves do roll up. You can see stuff and stuff happens. So that really wasn't a great place to put it. If I were wanting to cover that up for like business attire, I wouldn't be able to wear short sleeves. I wouldn't be able to wear anything of that sort without having the fear of my tattoo being out. and about, just to see. So that is kind of something that affected me, not as of right now, obviously, because I do work at a coffee shop and that is not seen as professional, but maybe down the road it might be a thing. I'm not sure how it'll change over generations, but we will see. But I also wanted to add this picture right next to my tattoo. So I actually work for a modeling agency, and I got this invitation to model for a pizza company just a few weeks ago. And I found this very interesting because I've never gotten an email like this with a request like this, and it worked perfectly for this project. So I thought I had to add it. So it says, please hit accept if available, and then please hit decline if unavailable. But then at the bottom, you can see that it says, if you have tattoos on hands or forearms, please decline as well. So I never seen that request before, so I obviously had to decline because I have that forearm tattoo. But it was really just interesting to see because it goes to show that professional workplaces are still having those stigmas and they are still around today. So I know I hit tattoo stigma causes in a previous slide very briefly, but I definitely wanted to go into this topic in more depth because this was the primary focus of my research, because they are so similar, however they differ so much because there are so many varying reasons. So this first article that I found, they conducted interviews in Nigeria on different employees and managers, and they found that a lot of them have negative connotations of people with tattoos due to religious reasons. So I thought this was a cool article to look at because it's not only centered in the US, it is obviously going on in different places in the world, different countries. So that's kind of cool to see. And obviously there are so many varying religions and all of that stuff, and all of them have different beliefs, different standards, everything of that sort. But a lot of the religion in Nigeria seems to not find tattoos to be ethical to have. So this peer-reviewed academic journal, it focuses on interviews of the different Nigerian employees and managers, and it explores that stigmatism related to tattoos and how they're perceived in the workplace. And they also hit on how these physical markers can actually affect your hiring probability. So this is obviously contrary to the present belief that tattoos and all of those physical markers are starting to make their way into workplaces more. However, obviously those stigmas are still going to be around, and there are still going to be rules and regulations on that. So this article actually examines those negative connotations, which is shaped by religious beliefs, but also cultural values and a lot of just preconceived notions and assumptions about professionalism and intellectual status, etc., when you have all of these tattoos. So a lot of key findings in this article, they find that these negative assumptions ultimately affect hiring decisions because these managers have preconceived notions on the tattoos. And so in turn, it really just makes them think that people aren't as professional or aren't as intellectual as the rest. So I found that super interesting. Another one that I researched is that old stigma is still in existence today, which ultimately leads to the discrimination and stigma we see in professional workplaces today. So obviously, like I said, it's very hard to completely eliminate these stigmas because people have varying views and people learned these old stigmas and just won't get it out of their brains. They won't change. So these old stigmas are obviously still in existence, which helps give rise to these stigmas. So Belkin, he hits on the fact that tattoos are very special for people who like to express their unique identities that way, while simultaneously acting as physical markers that can trigger inequality and stigma in corporate environments. So he draws on these qualitative interviews and the sociology theory, particularly Irving Goffman's work on stigma, and he analyzes the way tattooed professionals navigate workplace norms, identity, expectations, dress codes, all of that stuff. So this study that he did, it ultimately demonstrates that although tattoos have become a lot more socially acceptable, there are still those traditional stigmas that stand, and some people just won't change for that matter. So that obviously will lead to the inequality that is found in these workplace settings, especially white-collar settings, which I will get to later. I will talk more about white-collar settings. But another research article that I found says that the idea of neoliberalism and aligning physical appearance with corporate professional norms. So this was really interesting to me because Wendy Brown, the woman who wrote this, she examines that idea of neoliberalism and how it can reshape political and social life. It extends market logic into different aspects of society, and she ultimately illustrates that neoliberalism can change individuals into a form of human capital, inspiring them to see themselves as entrepreneurial actors responsible for maximizing their own value. So she emphasizes that people must self-manage and internalize market standards, then train themselves accordingly. So obviously with this, they internalize those and they go by the rules. They hold themselves to higher standards because of this neoliberalism, which was really interesting to me. And then finally on this slide, we have that the idea of tattoos is not actually explicitly stated in the Civil Rights Act unless it's for religious reasons. So I found this to be really cool because this is actually factual evidence of why people are allowed to have these stigmas in workplaces. So obviously, you can't discriminate against or deny an individual a job based on gender, race, or religion. However, tattoos not explicitly stated under this act, so that means people have the freedom and free will to just discriminate against people with tattoos. So that obviously gives rise because there's no consequence, there's no punishment for actually discriminating. So just when you thought there couldn't be any more tattoo stigma causes, there are actually a lot more, and obviously a lot more that I didn't research, but these are the main ones that I found and that varied the most. So another one that I found is that a survey conducted on over 3,000 US adults found that people without tattoos are more likely to view people with tattoos as unprofessional and not as smart. So these surveys, the quantitative data that the surveys provide, they truly examine the social dishonor that people have in the general population. So it's really interesting to see out of 3,000 US adults, the majority of people without tattoos are more likely to view people with tattoos as unprofessional and not as smart. So obviously these preconceived notions without even getting to know the person or actually talk to them, just assuming that they're not professional based on their tattoos, this really gives rise to that stigma even more. Another article that I found, there was a study done on 80 people, and it found that a lot of instances of people dealing with racial and gender inequality in long-term care facilities go unreported because they think it's normal or because the residents' old age, which is known as the legal consciences theory. So this one was really interesting because this one was mainly about gender and race inequality. However, that can definitely correlate and cross that bridge to tattoo discrimination as well. Because this study, it basically explains why many of these experiences go unreported. Because even though there are legal protections for all sorts of inequality and discrimination, these interviews found out of 80 staff members of all different levels in the facility, they apply the legal consciousness theory, which this theory explains how these workers interpret the discrimination and inequality they receive from the workers or even the residents. So these studies, they actually found that most workers who experience this discrimination often dismiss it, and they consider it, or they believe that it's normal behavior of the residents, or it's because of their old age, they don't really know what they're saying. So a lot of the time they just brush it off and they don't say anything, which obviously leads to no change, and it leads to people feeling helpless and people just not standing up for themselves. So obviously I'm not saying gender and race equality is any less than tattoo discrimination by any means, but this can very much correlate to tattoo inequality because these are all physical markers that we're talking about. So if somebody discriminated on tattoos because of their old age, the workers might think, oh, it's just because of their old age, or it's because they think it's normal behavior. So it's very interesting to see this, and it was very interesting to make this correlation because of these physical markers, and we can see that so many instances will go unreported because of this. So the last one that I found was 2 experiments were conducted with working adults, and they found that casual attire is seen as less ethical compared to professional attire, and people look at how well the attire matches the setting. And this is actually known as signaling theory. So this is a peer-reviewed journal, and it looks at how various forms of this work attire can impact people's perceptions of ethicality and professionalism. So this signaling theory is basically saying when other people don't have anything else to go off of, they will go off of something that makes you unique and that differs from other people. So like people in different wear, like compared to casual or professional, they'll obviously, and if we're in professional setting and people have professional attire on, that's what's expected. But if people have the casual attire on, it doesn't match the setting. So people are going to see that and they are going to make assumptions. It's the same with tattoos, because these are all physical markers that make you unique, and they use those against people to discriminate when they have nothing else to go off of. Not even talking to you, just a first glance look, they will see what is different and they will go off of that. And it's especially with tattoos that people will start doing this. So obviously all these varying reasons for tattoo stigmas, they have a lot of effects and impacts on employees in professional settings. And I definitely wanted to see what those impacts were, even though they may seem surface level, but really it does go deeper than you think. So from one article, it says that people feel forced to strategically cover up their tattoos, specifically in white-collared workplaces. So white-collared workplaces are basically the complete opposite from blue-collared workplaces. So white-collared workplaces are those places that are known as professional. People went to college, they studied, and they got a degree, and now they're working in a professional field. And not to say that blue-collared workers are any less, it's just that's how they differ. And so in those white-collared workplaces, those professional settings, people feel forced to strategically cover up their tattoos because of people saying stuff, and because of societal standards, because of rules and regulations, because there are no legal protections under that Civil Rights Act. People are allowed to say things, and so people feel forced to cover these tattoos up and not express themselves. So another study done on over 860 U.S. employees found that positive body image is connected to a more positive outlook and attitude at work, while low body image relates to low self-esteem and a negative attitude. So while this may seem surface level, it really goes deeper than you think, because positive body image, that could be yourself, that could be based on others' opinions of you. It's whatever you personally think it is. But these positive outlooks, like that saying is, if you feel good, you're going to have a good day, or you're going to do good, you're going to work good. Like, you need to feel good to do good. That's kind of what this is saying. So that positive body image is connected to a more positive outlook and attitude. However, low body image relates to low self-esteem and a negative attitude. So if people are going around saying all these things about tattoos, how they're not professional, how they should be covered up with these people in front of them, they're going to have low self-esteem. They're going to have a negative attitude. They're not going to work as well. So you can see how this tattoo stigma can really affect people and their work ethic, because in hindsight, people are really just there to get their job done and make money. But when people say these things or bring up the stigma of tattoos or anything like that, it can really cause somebody to get out of line. And then the last one I found is that since stigma is so normalized in some workplaces, a lot of people ignore it and it ends up going unreported. So like I said in the last slide, the gender and race inequality definitely connects to tattoo inequality. Not the same by any means, but it definitely correlates in a way. And so obviously, since this stigma is so normalized in old stigma and people aren't willing to change, I mean, some people are obviously willing to change, but a lot of people might not be. So it's very interesting to see that in these places, especially with older residents that grew up in that time of discrimination against these physical markers, a lot of people ignore it because they think that it's so normalized and that it's so drilled into their brain, they're not willing to make a change about it. So they definitely go more unreported than you would think. So there are obviously a lot of conclusions that can be made from this project, but this whole project's purpose was to understand why tattoo stigmas are still present today in professional workplace settings and to shed light on how that affects the employees themselves. Because of course it's important to understand why these tattoo stigmas arise so that we can change it and go for change. But it's also really important to see how that affects the employees themselves and their self-esteem, trying to put yourself in their shoes to see how they're feeling. So there are obviously many reasons why tattoo stigma is still in place. Like we went over a lot of them, but obviously not all of them, but a lot of the reasons reflecting cultural and societal standards for physical appearance. So from the trends in the data and the research, we can obviously see that professionalism equals no tattoos or physical markers, and respectability equals lower for people who have these physical markers like tattoos. And even though this might be surface level, or people might already know this or assume this, it's very important to research to see why and how so that we can strive for change in these ways. One slide that I thought I might add that was pretty interesting is these posters saying no visible tattoos. So these are hiring applications, and a lot of people might just be looking for a quick job, quick place to earn money, but a lot of these places have no visible tattoos. And if all of these are being presented to the public, it's obviously going to become so normalized, because seeing these places, these workplaces that are maybe not high up, but higher up than you would think, saying no visible tattoos, that stigma is obviously going to stay. And I'm not sure how old these posters are, but either way, there are definitely still posters out there that say these things. So it's important to understand that a lot of these stigmas are beginning to fade in today's day and age. However, like anything else, it's difficult to completely eliminate. So it's very important that we learn this topic and we strive to eliminate it as best we can. But then the other two that I have on here are reviews from Reddit of people talking about tattoos, which I thought was really cool to see how people thought without research, without data, just them and their thinking. So this one says, I mainly get the whole career conscious thing from my mother as well. She offered to pay for one when I turned 16, but she really drove home the job part to whole time. I ended up declining it. I still am unsure if jobs are truly destigmatized or ever fully will be, which keeps that little worry there. So really interesting to see how this person doesn't think that these stigmas will ever be completely destigmatized, which is very sad to say, but it might be true. And this other one says, I find them quite cool. However, I can't help but think people with face tattoos have bad judgment, which I feel is wrong, and I shouldn't really judge people without knowing them, but whatever. So obviously we can see face tattoos are a whole different category, but obviously they're still tattoos. So just seeing people judging, even though they feel wrong about it, it still happens, and it might not be consciously that you're doing it, but it still happens, which also gives rise to these stigmas. These are all my references, and thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. I hope you guys learned more about tattoo stigma, the effects that it has on the employees themselves, and what is actually seen as professional, because I definitely didn't understand that. We obviously have our preconceived notions on that, but seeing research and data put into it, really helps. So thank you guys.